Hi, my name is Jacob, and this is my video. This is my Journey in Truth video newsletter for Tuesday, February 6, 2018. If you're watching this through my Instagram account, you should be able to click on the link below or copy and paste the link in your web browser to be navigated to my Facebook page, Journey in Truth, where you can watch the full featured video. So with that being said, if you watched my video yesterday, you know that this week's theme has to do with an introduction on who the Israelites of the Bible are. And yesterday we learned 4 key points that I'll quickly touch on. We learned the names of all the 12 tribes of Israel. We also learned the brief history about Moses and the Egyptians, and the correlation between the Egyptians being black and the Israelites having to be black that I confirmed in key point number 3 with the UNESCO meeting, which is it's a United Nations division, and it's the highest institution in the world that can make these kinds of decisions. And the decision that they made at the conclusion of this meeting in Cairo in 1974, where they had the best Egyptologists in the world, they ruled that the Egyptians were a black race. Period. If you want to learn more, go back and watch that video. Again, it's in yesterday's video newsletter. And then lastly, we learned through the New Testament that Jesus is in fact a black man. Not my opinion, it's in the Bible. So that was the preface for today's teaching. So today's topic is God's commandments. And when I say God's commandments, I'm referring to the 10 commandments that he gave exclusively to the Israelites. So for the sake of time, I think that's the only portion I'll touch on today. So let me get started. So I'm reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 1. And he says, "And God spake all these words, saying," so these are the words that God said. Verse 2, he said, "I am the Lord thy God," meaning I am the Lord your God, to the Israelites, "which have bought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." Just a really brief history. God bought the Egyptians out of their captivity and slavery with the Egyptians. You may or may not the story, but briefly stated, he hit the Egyptians with, I think it was 10 different plagues. I think it's 10. I forget the exact number. But anyhow, he hit them with a series of plagues until the Pharaoh finally agreed to let the Israelites go, but that wasn't enough. So then they needed to escape the Egyptians, and God parted the Red Sea to allow the Israelites to get past the river, to get past the Red Sea. They were all on foot, and they managed to do that when he parted the Red Sea for them. So anyhow, that's what he means when he says, "I am the Lord your God, which have bought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." So now, Here are the laws. The commandments. They begin with verse 3. He says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Or you shall have no other gods before me. Now, why is he saying you shall have no other gods? Because in the Bible, it's evident that there are other gods worshipped by different civilizations, different races of people. And in fact, demons, Satan himself, is worshipped in this manner. But I'll save that for another video. That's why the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, he's telling these Israelites that he picked to be his own, to be his holy people. He's telling them, you shall have no other gods, meaning he's confirming that there are other gods and spirits that the other races of people are worshiping, and includes today. So now going on to verse 4. This is really important. They're all important, but please pay close attention. He says, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So let's break this down. He says, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. What does he mean by graven image? Graven means anything that's sculpted, fixed, or carved. Statue, anything. So again, sculpted, fixed, or carved. Any image. So, and then he goes on to say that these images, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, meaning these images can't have the likeness, looking like anything in heaven above. So what's an example of that? So for example, within the Roman Catholic and Christianity churches, the most common sculpture or, carved, image that's of the likeness in heaven is the wooden cross. And I should have gone on to the next verse. Let me do that, guys. I'm going to come right back to this. Please hold this thought. I'm going to come right back. I'm going to verse 5. Verse 5, he says, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord, thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So he's saying you shall not bow down yourself to these images as well, these carved sculptures, whatever they are. He's saying you won't bow down to them, nor will you serve them. Excuse me. So within all the other religions, except the Holy Bible for these Israelites, they worship sculpted images. For example, again, I just to circle back to the cross, for example. In my Assyrian church, as soon as you walk into, I don't know what you would call that, basically the church, the main area, the chapel portion maybe, where everyone sits and, the priest does his prayer. As soon as you walk in, people kiss a golden cross and they bow down to it. Some kiss a cloth that has crosses on it and they bow down to it. And then there's this huge wooden cross that everyone is more or less worshiping to because it's an image it represents Jesus. But according to God, he says, you won't make any of these images. You won't worship them. Why? Because that's his command. He said, you don't do that. And then you look universally within the church. They have idols and statues of different saints, including the Virgin Mary. Nowhere in the Bible does it say we're to worship saints or worship the Virgin Mary. None of that. That's nowhere. And even the festival days that they have. But I'm digressing now. So I just want to be clear with you in verse 4 and 5. Think very critically about what he's saying. He's saying, you will not make any image, whether it's carved, fixed, just fixed, sculpted like a statue, that's in any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. That means it doesn't matter, what this image represents. You don't create it. And he says, you don't bow down to them. You don't serve them. That's what all the other pagan religions did, including the Romans before they adopted certain aspects of Christianity within their sun worship. They were worshiping the sun god, which is Baal. Baal is Satan. And that's who they merged these Christian, some of the Christian religious beliefs. That's why they even have their own version of the Bible that has several commandments removed from their version of the Bible, and they combined it with their sun worship. So if you're to apply just verses 4 and 5 in any modern church, you'd have a couple of strikes against them and really some questions for concern. But let me keep going. And then in verse 6, he says, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Please pay very close attention to that verse. He says, as he's giving them commandments, he's saying in the prior verse, he said that he would show iniquity to the fathers upon to the children of third and fourth generations for those that hate me, is what he's saying. But then in verse 6, he says, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. So I'm going to jump to I'm going to go to 1 John chapter 2, verse 4 in the King James Version. Now, John is saying that he that says, I know him, meaning I know Jesus, and you don't keep his commandments, he says that person is a liar and the truth is not in him. And then if I go to John chapter 14, verses 15, 15 through 17, he says, if you love me, now this is Jesus, he says, if you love me, this is Jesus in the New Testament, he says, if you love me, keep my commandments, the commandments that I'm reading to you. He says, and I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide in you forever. Even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it sees him not, neither knoweth him, but you know him, for he dwelleth with you and shall be in you. But notice that the prerequisite, this is coming from Jesus. He's saying, keep my commandments. So let me go back to the commandments. In verse 7, he says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. So, I'm sure you guys know what vain means, to take something in vain. So that means having or showing an excessively high opinion of one's appearance, abilities, or worth. Self-loving, narcissist, conceited, in love with oneself, self-admiring. So basically, what does he mean by that? He means, you won't, I lost my, here we go, sorry. So he says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Basically, don't profane the name of God. It is, and he's what he's saying, and to do that, you're almost being self-centered. It's pointless. It's self-admiring, self-regarding. It's egocentric, self-obsessed. So he's saying, don't do that. Don't do that. And then in verse 8, he says, this is really important. In verses 8 through 11, he says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou work, labor, and do all thy work. And then he says in verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. And thou shalt not do any work, nor thou, meaning you, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day, where the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, there are 4 verses dedicated to just the Sabbath. God is placing so much emphasis on the Sabbath, and what he's saying is, he sanctified or made holy the Sabbath day. That is such a big deal. The fact that he hallowed it, he sanctified it, it means it has tremendous value to him. Tremendous value. Don't take it lightly, is what he's saying. He's saying, in 6 days, you do all your work. Do whatever you got to do to earn a living. But he's saying, on that seventh day, I want you not just to rest. He doesn't mean just rest. No, he means to use that day to do something productive in serving him, whether it's educating people, and that's typically what I do on the Sabbath, because I don't congregate with other Israelites. So what I do is I use that time, a little prayer time, but mainly I use it to create my educational videos. And if I can, if I need to drive to, say, a friend's house to get together and praise God, or just have an educational a time spent together, that's keeping the Sabbath holy. The only thing is, you can't really work on the Sabbath. If you need to take a shower and you need to use warm water, that's okay. I know part of the Sabbath commandment is you don't kindle a fire. That really means, what it means is you don't cook. You're not supposed to cook on the Sabbath. But I'm digressing now. So just circling back to the Sabbath really quick. It starts on Friday sundown and it lasts until Saturday sundown. So whatever you do on the Sabbath, even if you're going to you're visiting someone who's in the hospital, you're doing something that is honoring God, that's okay to do on the Sabbath. It doesn't mean you stay home and rest and just sleep all day. No, that's not what he means. But sticking with the Sabbath, in verse 10, he says, he's describing, you're not supposed to work. He's saying your servants aren't supposed to work, even strangers within your gates. What he's saying is, anyone that's in your immediate circle of, say, influence, they're not supposed to work. Like, for example, if you own a company, no one in your company can work, is what he's saying. When he's saying your maidservant, your manservant, he's saying not even thy cattle, meaning everyone just rests. That's what he means. And then verse 12, he says, honor thy father, thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord gave thee. Again, he's saying have tremendous respect, for your parents. Honor them, is what he's saying. And then verse 13, thou shalt not kill. That's a no-brainer. 14, thou shalt not commit adultery. Now, adultery means many different things. So with adultery, it could, pornography is a big one because, obviously with the internet, it's just a huge opportunity to source, that industry, and it's always at your fingertips. That's just a really good example with adultery. And then, of course, with adultery, you have fornication, and, whether it's, a husband and wife, maybe they're having affairs. I think you get the idea when it comes to adultery. He's saying, thou shalt not commit adultery in verse 14. Verse 15, thou shalt not steal. That's self-explanatory. Verse 16, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. When I read that passage, to me that means having integrity in your actions, right? So not being a false witness. And then verse 17, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, referring to their cattle, nor anything that is in thy neighbor's that is thy neighbor's, excuse me. So covet, what does covet mean? So here, I know what it means, but here, let me just get you some synonyms. He says, to desire for, crave, have one's heart set on, to want, wish for. So, don't look upon, your neighbor, your friends, whoever it is, and, wanting the things that they have, and I think by that he's just saying, be thankful, for what you have, and just, that's it. Just don't covet anything from them. And I think the reason for that, and I'd be interested to hear your viewpoint too, but from my standpoint, I think the reason he's saying that is because that within itself creates insecurities for us, right? And, we feel, maybe lower, or, it impacts our self-esteem. I think that's why he's saying that, because he's adding value to the Israelites as a people, saying, just don't covet because it'll have negative implications on you as a person. So So those were the 10 commandments. And, what I really want to recall here is that in the New Testament, I quoted you 1, 2, 3 scriptures where Jesus and John confirmed that if you love Christ, you have to keep his commandments. But there are many other verses in the New Testament that echo those statements that they made, because they knew that from the beginning, in the Old Testament, even in the Apocrypha, all of the prophets, they always stated, you have to honor God's laws and commandments. And believing in Jesus and saying, I'm reborn, that's just the beginning. That's like, imagine, you were trying so hard to get into a university and they finally agreed to let you in. And all right, now you're in Harvard, for example. Your journey is just beginning. You've got to go through, how many ever credit hours it is for your degree to graduate. And you have to pass a series of tests to graduate, right? So similarly, just saying, just claiming that, oh, I'm reborn in Christ, hey, that's great. You're at the beginning of a long journey. And as Jesus said, he says, he that says, I know him. No, that's John saying, he that says, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in you. And in John, again, chapter 14, verses 15 and 31, he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. So, my advice to you is really meditate on everything you learned from me today and take it a step further. Open up a Bible, read this content and, arrive at your own conclusions. And that's really my goal in all my teachings, is to provide you with, this unbiased, objective information with the highest level of integrity, so that you could arrive at your own conclusions. Because me personally, having been studying this for a very long time, I see what's going on in the churches today. You may not. You may not see it, or you might have your own concerns, your own views, and our views may be similar, but I'm taking it to the next level by